Joining us now, former Council of Economic Advisors Acting Chair Tom Philipson. Tom, break this down in terms of the ability to offset revenue brought in through income taxes with tariff revenue, because this switch would encourage you tax work less, encourage people to work, and you discourage consumption. And that's overall great economic policy.
Well, I think the key here is that U.S. is so self-reliant. We just buy and sell with each other a lot more than other countries do, 85% of economic activity. But in terms of the numbers, I think there's limits to how much you can do this. You know, payroll and income taxes are about $4 trillion, or 80% of our revenue in government. That's also roughly the size of all imports. So you would have to tax basically all imports at 100%, which would lead to zero imports, obviously. There's a Laffer curve on how much you can tax imports. But in general, the idea of pushing some of the domestic taxes to stimulate economic activity at home onto foreigners, and people say this is just a sales tax, that's misleading, I think. It's going to be shared depending on the competitiveness of the tariff industry to the U.S. domestic industry. If you sell relative to competition in the U.S. and you try to raise prices just because you got a tariff, you're going to lose customer. You're out of business, essentially. So some of it is going to be borne by foreigners, for sure. But we can't go back to 1900 or whatever, when we had all tariff revenue. The reason we can't is because the government was only about 2% roughly of GDP, which is now it's about 20% of tax revenue is about 20% of our GDP. So that it's a scale issue, but the direction is definitely right.
Yeah, I feel like the math doesn't quite math, because Hassett was saying it's $500 billion to $1 trillion is what he thinks the China tariffs would bring in. That's a fraction of the overall pie, and not covering, for example, what you said, income taxes.
Well, I think he was talking about overtaxing all imports.
Yeah, that was a 10-year.
Over 10 years.
It was a 10-year.
Over 10 years. So again, a math issue here. What about this idea of abolishing the IRS? How realistic is that? It's music to the ears of many, many conservatives and just other taxpayers as well. But is it in the cards?
Well, it depends on what IRS does. I mean, if you abolish domestic taxes, you're going to make it up. Unless you want to shrink government to the size we had, 100 years ago, which I think is unlikely, to say the least. You have to collect taxes somehow. But obviously, Trump is going in the right direction. There couldn't be a bigger contrast between Biden and Trump. Biden wanted to add 86,000 people to IRS if he got his will. He got pushed down a little bit. And to audit, taxpayers. And that would mostly be audits of middle class, not high-income individuals, because there's not that many around. Compare that to Trump, who's using a free Doge, essentially, to audit IRS. It's the exact opposite of what Biden wanted to do, to look into what IRS essentially is doing. I don't think abolishing domestic revenue is feasible, but like I said, they're going in the right direction of trying to increase economic growth by essentially reducing taxes on domestic activity and pushing it on to foreign activity. And foreigners are paying the price. Look how scared they get every time we talk about tariff. If they're not paying the price, why are they so scared?
Exactly. So Doge, you mentioned Doge. Doge has uncovered more than 4 million active government credit cards with $40 billion in spending for fiscal 2024. Just your reaction to that, Tom, and what Doge is doing. I argue that what Doge is doing is important, at least just to even nip away at the edges, because of the dire financial situation the U.S. is in, and the fact that like half our outstanding treasury debt rolls over in 3 years. Like, we're on the razor's edge of having a spike in interest rates and being past the point of no return.
Yeah, I agree, Dagan. You couldn't be more right. I mean, the $40 billion on credit card depends on what they spend it on. If this is credit cards for lunch money when they travel, whatever, I don't know what they're spending it on. But we could put AI at Doge to use and figure out, is this good spending or not? But I hope they're not paying 20% interest on the credit cards, given the interest we're paying as a government. But generally speaking, I think Doge is extremely effective because currently they're only going after spending, and they're going to go after a lot of stuff. Particularly, they're going to go after entitlements because there's a lot of entitlement spending, Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid, that is not on eligibles, essentially, that they're going after. Like
fraud.
Dead people and Medicare fraud is the biggest crime business, essentially, in Florida, where a lot of retired people. So that's good. But they're also going to raise revenue because the regulatory part of Doge hasn't even started. And that's going to increase economic activity. So they're both reducing spending and increasing revenue, which means a deficit impact on both ends, which I think is going to be a very, very healthy development going forward.
Tom Philipson, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.